Hello. Hi, Mandira.
Yeah.
Hi, Mandira.
Hi.
Hi. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Are you?
Yes, perfect. So, Mandira, thank you so much for agreeing to come onto this call and share your travel experiences of traveling through Myanmar with all of us at Girls on the Go. So I'm just going to
Thank you for having me.
introduce you. Thanks. So I'm just going to briefly introduce you to everybody who's listening to you, when they're going to listen to you later, actually. So
Okay.
Mandira Nayyar is basically a very, very avid traveler, and she's also a journalist with The Week. And she traveled to Myanmar in 2013 as part of her in-depth writing assignment as the first Indian magazine journalist when Myanmar just opened up. And she had the honor of actually meeting Aung San Suu Kyi, and she had a brief conversation with her as well. And I guess her biggest adventure while traveling to Myanmar was losing her passport, just like her mother told her she would. So, you know how hyper intuitive moms are. But thankfully, she was able to find her passport again. And she's also had some other incredible adventures where she's traveled through the Salang tunnel with a prized fighting cock. So we need to hear more about that.
Well, it tried to escape in the tunnel. This was the Salang tunnel is one of the highest tunnels as far as and longest. It's in Afghanistan. And we bought this fighting cock. I mean, we didn't, of course. The driver did. Woman, as far as I remember, and it was in a basket in front of sitting at the feet of my husband when, because if it was dark, it decided to actually make its bid for freedom. So there we were in the middle of this tunnel and this bird sort of flying around in the car. It was actually quite a wonderful experience, unforgettable too. But
Amazing.
yeah.
Absolutely stunning. And okay, Mandira has also eaten mangoes in Isalif, and she's driven from Bukhara to Kabul. So that's
Yes.
amazing. I mean, we're going to perhaps do more series of talks with you where you can tell us more about your adventures in Afghanistan in detail. Because Afghanistan has actually been on my personal travel list for a while, but obviously because of the
but it is stunning. I mean, I think the Panjshir Valley, you only hear about this, right? And it's so green,
right?
And the trees are so. I mean, they dwarf you in a way that, and when you say it's dark, underneath those trees, it's really dark, and you've got these flowing streams. Some of it is exactly how Babu described it. Nothing has changed, including the little hunting ducks. It's one of the most beautiful, peaceful places in the world, and yet it's the most war-torn, and it is deeply heartbreaking because the Afghans are one of the warmest, most optimistic, incredibly generous people. And you can never go home. Yeah, so you can never go to somebody's house without actually coming back with leaving empty-handed or without something. They have nothing, but they will offer you everything, and they're strangely a little obsessed with beauty. So every time I went in, all they wanted to do was put makeup on me for some strange reason. All the women, okay, but it was bizarre. But yeah, so yeah,
we're certainly going to have a detailed chat on this, Mandira. Maybe we're going to do another second episode with you, because I think a lot of women do want to travel to Afghanistan, and I'm sure they would like to know these details.
Yeah, well, maybe not now at the moment. Yeah, I think
for the next
piece.
Yes, once things are a little more settled.
Yeah, so.
But on that same note, of things, one can travel to Afghanistan when things are a little better. So on the same note, we're going to come to the destination that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, Myanmar.
That is Myanmar, which was earlier called Burma, which is unfortunately, again, going through a series of political
Yeah.
issues and,
Yeah.
with all the
Hmm.
unfortunate things that are happening there right now, which is once
Hmm.
again restricted tourism. But
Hmm.
I want to keep the note of this, the tone rather of this talk really positive, because Myanmar
Hmm.
has a very, very special place in my mind. I've had family from Myanmar, and I
Hmm.
myself traveled there around 2, 3 years back. And I had a
Okay.
beautiful, beautiful, beautiful experience traveling there.
Hmm.
And it certainly
Hmm.
remains as one of the most memorable, uh,
I
places that
agree.
I've ever visited to. Just the
Yeah.
simplicity of the place, the simplicity of the people.
True.
Like for me, when so I'm originally from, I was born in Kolkata. So, and I've
Huh.
spent several years studying in Kolkata as well. So some,
Hmm.
Yangon, for instance, reminded me of Kolkata, let's say 20 years back. Like it literally
True.
seemed like it was superimposed, but just living in another era.
Yeah.
So it has a
Yeah.
really, really special place in my mind. So I really
Hmm.
wanted you to tell us about your experiences traveling in Myanmar, both from the
So I've
perspective of a
actually been.
solo woman traveler and
Yeah. So
also.
I yeah. So actually, the first time I went in 2013, I've been twice. The first time I went in 2013, it was sort of it was the first time I'd been on an overseas assignment without anybody, including a photographer. We usually go as a team, right? And we do our own bookings and stuff like that. And it was at the time when Myanmar had just opened up. Okay, there was a possibility of democracy, freedom, and everything like that. You could it was there were no cell phones, or if there were, they were very patchy. I didn't know anybody. I knew a friend of a friend's sister lived there, strangely. And they helped me out. Even you couldn't book a ticket, for example. Even after that, you couldn't book a ticket online to say go from Yangon to anywhere else. You couldn't. Cell phones were unaffordable completely. It was really weird. There was no. I didn't know any language. I didn't know who was going to meet me. I mean, of course, nobody was going to meet me. It was going to be me on my own.
Right.
So yeah, it was a really liberating trip in some ways, because it was a very challenging trip for someone who was looking to do a news story. And of course, as editors go, the only thing that they wanted me to do was meet Aung San Suu Kyi. And like I said to everybody, it's not like Aung San Suu Kyi is going to be holding a placard. Everybody wanted to meet her. I mean, like she's the most elusive woman. In fact, she's called the lady. And my piece, I think, said the lady vanishes, because
Right.
she's everywhere and she was nowhere to be seen. It's a little bit like a parallel right now. I sort of, like you said, I met her really briefly, in the sense she came to the NLD office on the time she was supposed to. If you try and make an interview, try and have an interview request, you never had this thing. But I met a very interesting man, and he sort of set it up. But he told me she was coming, so I had like one question, and that was my big moment with her. So like I did cross that off my list as my editor wanted. But more than that, it was a time when Myanmar had just opened, and like you said, uh, Yangon, Rangoon really is like Calcutta. I grew up in Calcutta myself, right? And it is really it's bizarre, even the covered markets. There's an Indian quarter, so there's a Kali Mandir, which looks, except that, the Kali Mandir is adapted to looking like, looking local. There's a huge Indian population even now. There's a very interesting story about these two places just outside Yangon, Zewadi, and another place which has Indian population, indentured labor, who never went back, and they've stayed there since 1942, when the Great Exodus happened. I traveled to Yangon. I traveled to Mandalay. I traveled to Sitwe, the capital of Rakhine, which is wonderful and interesting, and was in the news even then. So it was very wonderful. That then I went back in 2015, and the world had completely changed. Economy had changed for Myanmar. So it suddenly became like the place everybody wanted to go. So cell phone reception had changed. It would become the cheapest place. I think the person who was Telenor, which was the big telephone brand at that point of time, was actually headed by an Indian. So it was a wonderful, cushy expat life. So things like that had changed completely for Myanmar. But yeah, there's a huge Indian connection. Like you said, you were from Myanmar, and I think when we spoke before, you told me a really interesting story about about your family and tracing your family home, right?
Yeah, that was in Molamine.
Yeah. And, there is, if you go to Yangon, it is a place where there's still a huge Indian presence. You sort of feel it like an Indian town in very many ways. Till 1942, Indians, I think the figure was 55% of Indians paid municipal tax in Rangoon than anything else, than anybody else. So Rangoon was essentially an Indian city. It wasn't a Burmese city. Um, I think at the 1931 census says 6.9% of people were Indian. It's a pretty large thing. Bengalis were large component of that. Bagan I went to, which is, of course, did you go? It was one of the most stunning places in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They say you have to see a sunset or a sunrise in Bagan, and I remember it feels like it's the end of the world. You're all alone, and it's the
Hot air
sun.
balloons and everything.
Yes, and the sky is it is just unimaginably colored. There are the shades of purple and mauve that exist. I don't even think we have names for it. It's just, you feel a bit like Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, okay, where there's nobody and it's in wilderness and it's wonderful. It's just like the most stunning place ever. So, I think I'm hoping that Bagan opens up and we can sort of go back, and the economy will force the coup to sort of open.
Yeah, yeah. So in fact, Mandira, like when I went to Myanmar, uh,
Mhm.
you know, like I said, that my family, part of my family, they are from Myanmar. So
Uh-huh.
growing up in seeing my family, my mother and my aunts, uh,
Mhm.
they used to talk in the Burmese language that they had learned before they had migrated to
Hmm.
India. And I
Hmm.
used to also see them talk about their local culture. They would also make a lot of Khow, which was like the main memory that I have of me
Hmm.
growing up. You know,
Hmm.
and I literally expected that when I go to Myanmar, I had literally like made like a whole itinerary centered around wanting to go and eat at various
Eat
places and
Houseway.
finding out like all the
Yeah.
local food, and Khao
Yeah.
obviously made it to the top.
Yeah.
I was really surprised to see that I literally could not find Khao anywhere
True.
for the first 2 weeks of my travel. That was in
Yeah.
Yangon and Bagan and a couple of other
Yeah.
places. And I was really
Yeah.
upset because I'm like, and also puzzled because uh, in my consciousness, Myanmar was equal to Khao
Was to Causeway. I agree. I know. I was hoping to go there, and I expected, honestly, in all my research that I did, okay, I expected that there would be Causeway. Okay. Like I grew up in Calcutta. Causeway was the first time I ate Causeway in Calcutta, and I was convinced that this is going to be my go-to meal there. Right.
Absolutely.
And I was as surprised as you, where I didn't find Causeway. And then I actually asked this friend's sister, uh, who lived there, and she was Indian, right? And I asked her, and she said, "Well, Khawswe is actually name for rice noodles." So
Right.
essentially, that's what it is. It isn't anything like we remember. It isn't this
Yeah.
steaming
Yeah.
bowl of soup with all these condiments that sort of make it more spicy and things like that. And it really has an interesting history, actually, because if you
Absolutely.
look at it,
Mhm.
so like you, I was looking for Khawswe.
So
I
Mandira,
wanted to.
can you tell the people who are listening to this what exactly is Khao and what is also the local dish which is called Ono Khao for people who don't know
Okay.
what it is?
Okay, so Causeway is this, there are various versions of it, and every home has a different version, but most of it is the easiest way to describe it is that it's rice noodles in this incredibly a flavorful sort of soup, okay, coconut based usually, and it has a lot of condiments which you add on to it. So there is cut green chilies, there is garlic, there is peanuts, there is, there is nimbu, there is, depending on whatever you want, you sort of flavor it as you go. And it is this supposedly this street food that it is, that is, Burma is famous for. Like like I mentioned, when I went there, I didn't find any, but there is a version of it which is like a bhel, okay, like a Burmese bhel, which is a dry version of it, which I'm guessing is a little like Vai. When I grew up in boarding school, I mean, my last 2 years, and we were obsessed with with Vai, which is this very, which is a brand of noodles which we ate, which we didn't cook and eat. We ate it uncooked, and you used to put sort of flavor it with various things. It's a bit like that. That's kind of street food. It is available in the Indian quarter of Yangon, which I never really managed to get to, because I think it does only at 5:36, and I did have pakoras, but I didn't have that. But yes,
the
I
house way,
believe
the pale kind of house way.
the pale cow sway, yes. I was supposed to go back on my last night to eat pale cow sway, and in the Chinese quarter, deep fried worms. I had promised myself that I must be adventurous and I would have these deep fried worms. I never ended up doing that, either the worms or the cow sway bhel. But yeah, it is a bit like, I was told by somebody, there were these like food carts opposite chicken pakoda, which was like the local market to eat, that it is a bit like the tea salad. And the tea salad is like that. It's sort of dried tea leaves. It's like a spicy version of a bhel puri. And that, I believe, the cow sway is a lot like that. The dry version of it.
Okay. It's called the lafet
Interesting history. And
fermented tea.
yes. So it has a very interesting history. It traveled apparently. So apparently in southern in the south part of Myanmar, it's different. So it's a lot like what we expect, which is like in a soup thing. But they say, I've read a piece where they say that the cow sway in its version of the soup has also traveled to Malaysia, Thailand, where in Malaysia the laksa is supposed to be the Malaysian version of the cow sway. So there is that, and there is that bit of people leaving and taking their food with them, which is a very interesting thing.
Right. So this is the part that I really want to focus on, Mandira. Yeah. Let me just put it a little bit into context for whoever does not know the history of it. So basically, from what I understand, at the time when people started leaving from Myanmar to come to India and Pakistan, I think this was around the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken, primarily. Please correct me if I'm, if the dates.
It's late 60s really, because at some point of time they have there's a coup. So it's really in some ways a parallel, and when people leave, so a lot of people left in 42. Okay.
That was the first wave of migration.
Yeah. So the first phase of migration really happens in 42, between 42 and 44, the Second World War, when they say that the census 1931, and I'm going back to that because that seems to be the only authoritative time when you kind of know how connected Burma and India really are. It's a partition that happens that we really never really speak about, unlike 47, which is sort of the biggest partition in our lives, right? The one connected with the independence. Yes. So between 42 and 44, 50,000 people sort of flee across by foot, mostly from Burma. Okay, some of them, of course, are more privileged. They've sort of they've taken flights. Some of them have been by boat, but most of them actually walk across treacherous terrain, and only half of them make it back. And So that's the story, the long walk, really. There's a historian called Tinker, sorry, who calls it the long forgotten march, because there were different kinds of Indians cutting across sections, and they never talk about this ever. So that's the main phase of leaving. Some of the people actually go back post the war, okay, to sort of go either resettle and things like that. And in 60s, I mean, like for example, I know this one family that left and then came back, and in the 60s there was a coup again, and there was a great deal of nationalization, and there was an anti well, not Indian, but an anti-foreigner, and Indians were seen as foreigners, because when Burmese independence movement started, because the British had actually, it was under the British Empire, the British had actually used Indians to administer Burma. So that when the independence actually happened, on Aung San Suu Kyi's father, who was a general, that it sort of becomes slightly anti-Indian, and this sort of has sowed the seeds, and there is a certain history to it even now. But to cut a long story short, this in the coup that happens at that point of time, a lot of it is nationalized, and Indians leave. By Indians, I also mean Pakistanis, and a lot of Memons, the Gujarati community of who are part of Sitwe, who settled in Sitwe, actually flee and go back to Karachi, and they take with them the Khow, which is called kosa. And there's a desi twist to the food in the Karachi version of it.
Okay. Because I was actually very fascinated to discover about this aspect of Khow, of how the Memons actually popularized it in both in Karachi as well as in Surat in Gujarat. So I was traveling in Surat a couple of years back, and I happened to go to this part of Surat, which has a lot of Memoni families living there. And like the exact vision that I had in my mind when I was visiting Myanmar, which was I think just a year before that, where I'm going to see Khow like everywhere. I saw the same.
Was there everywhere?
Yeah, like there's this little market area, like in the center of the city, which has all the Memoni families living there. It was like Hausa paradise, because there were all these little shops all around, mostly like sort of like with these open stalls with these huge like pans simmering with Hausa, and of course in their localized version. So it was a slightly different take on the original Khow, which I was used to seeing. And so I was just absolutely mind blown, because the last place on earth where I expected to see anything related to Khow was in this little like town in Gujarat, which is mostly actually noted for its vegetarian food. So to see like hardcore non-vegetarian cows being cooked there, and people are so like passionate about their memories related to Myanmar, because I did meet a couple of Memoni families who spoke, and some of the old timers, and they would share about their nostalgia associated with their movement from Myanmar to Gujarat. So it was just amazing for me to even to see that. So that was just absolutely amazing. So yeah.
So tell me, this version of what you said, that this thing, was it a lot like the Calcutta version of it?
So the thing is that this was a slightly more spicier or a slightly more masaledar version of the Khow. The basic ingredients were still the same. Like there was noodles, there was coconut milk, which are the main base ingredients. But this had a bit more a bit more spices, like some more spices added onto it. And that was, I guess, the main difference. And they also had some crispy stuff, sprinkled on the top, which was
what that is?
Slightly different from what I was used to.
You know what that is? No. That is supposed to be deep fried samosa, the outside of the samosa.
Because I'd heard about the deep fried samosa version for the Karachi version, but I wasn't too sure what.
But it must be the same. It must be the same version. It must be a similar kind of thing. So because apparently the Karachi version has besan in it, gram flour, which is besan, right? And it's slightly more masaledar. and they don't use rice noodles, but they use spaghetti, which, I
Yes.
think in India you don't use rice noodles, you use any noodles. Okay.
Yeah.
And they put slices of the, like a deep floured, like a deep fried version, the outside of a, the samosa rind, if you
Yes.
know, right? The samosa bit without the aloo bit, right? So I'm assuming the crispy thing was probably that.
Mhm.
I'm not sure they put the besan into it, but maybe that's the same version of it with it's slightly more masaledar, and they say that they put a little more green chili. So and I know that it is. So I was talking to a friend and I was asking whether it still exists in Karachi. Apparently,
Mhm.
it's a huge deal.
Oh yeah, it's a big hit there. I mean, I've heard of
Yeah,
people
yeah,
who,
yeah.
after the Friday prayers, their standard
Hmm.
thing is to go and have like khausa. So it's a thing which
Yeah,
brings the whole community together. So I was like, oh my
yeah.
god, like a dish which went from a primarily Buddhist country all the way to like a primarily Hindu country like
And
India, and then to a primarily Muslim country like Pakistan. But
it's
people just
yeah,
forget, and it is like a standard thing people eat after their Friday prayers in
press.
Karachi.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How
So it's
totally
yeah,
blends all
it's strange.
cultures.
Yeah, it totally it's this wonderful connection that we really didn't this thing. So when I was doing this, I didn't really expect that there was a lot of migration and happened post independence, like in the 60s, with with the Memons actually moving back to Pakistan, some of them. And interestingly, while I was also looking at various research papers, I found a I found a reference apparently where they say that the Causeway actually went with people who went to the Bengalis. It went with actually it was a Bengali sort of take on the Causeway noodle thing, and it actually traveled to Calcutta with Bengalis. Because if you look at, and it could have happened because if you go back to data at that point of time, there were largely, I think, when they did a language survey about of all the people who spoke, what language they spoke in pre, again, sorry, 1931, and they found that while there was people from Gujarat, for Uttar Pradesh and stuff like that, Hindi, a lot of them were Bengalis. So it came across through Shan state and went with people who went to Bengal. So I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's one version of the story.
Because what I also heard from another person who's researching on food, like she's also a food researcher,
Mm-hmm.
is that
Mm-hmm.
once Kauswe kind of came to Kolkata with Bengali speaking people, from there it
Mm-hmm.
also was taken to other suburbs, in Bihar and other places where people were
Okay.
posted, uh, to work during that time. So
Mm-hmm.
like apparently even in places like Jamshedpur. So I mean, I grew up in Jamshedpur. So I've also heard
Okay.
that there is some history associated with Khawsui in Jamshedpur as well. So I need to, of course, look that up, and I'm trying to find out some more information. But apparently, a
Okay.
lot of these iron and steel related cities during that time had a culture
Would
of
have had.
eating, houseways. It was pretty popular there. So that was a very interesting dimension that kind of popped up when I
That's a very
saw.
interesting dimension. Yeah, it's really interesting how it sort of traveled in various ways. And if, even the Laksa connection, if you look at it, if you I mean, if you see Laksa, which has now become a big thing for all Delhi shadis, okay? Not that
Oh,
there has been a big Delhi shadi in the pandemic, but it became like the thing to have, okay? Um, if you look, I mean, strangely enough, now that I'm looking thinking about it, it was similar. They didn't have the variety of the condiments. So there wasn't like, say, I mean, if Kauswe had like spring onions, blah blah blah, it certainly had they did have onions. They had I don't remember garlic, but I remember onions, um, lime, and one more thing. So it is some version of it. It's never as spicy, but it does kind of fit into this whole narrative of how food really travels with people, and as with refugees. So yeah.
What I find really interesting is how the same dish uh, migrated with people uh, to the eastern side of India, that is towards Calcutta, and then to the western side of India towards Gujarat, and either from there to Karachi, or maybe there were people who directly went to Karachi as well.
They went
But
directly to Karachi, I think.
so then what about the Memons who stayed on in Gujarat? So did they come from Karachi later, or were they direct people who
No, so I
directly?
think there was, so there's a huge Memon community, right? So the Memons actually are one of, I mean, if they were the first travelers out of India, right? So they were the biggest traders of this. So if you look at maritime history, for example, there is the Memons are your first travelers out of India in terms of boats. So there's something called the the Pothis, the Mamni Pothis, I think, which is essentially the first navigation guide of which is now being translated by various institutes, which basically says that it was these people who sort of were the biggest navigators. But so there's a huge Memon community in Kutch, in Surat, in various places, and there was a huge Memoni community, of course, even in Pakistan, right? They're sort of culturally the same, but well, now in different countries, really. So I think in the late 60s, when they moved, the Memonis who chose to go to Pakistan went to Pakistan, and some Memonis chose to come to India. So these Memonis would have also been in Karachi. I mean, they came originally from Pakistan, geographically Pakistan, but larger India at that point of time, if you know what I mean. Because the community between this side and that side is the same. They speak the same language in some ways.
So my
So yeah.
question was like, it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting observation that while the Memons chose to kind of tailor Khow Suey into Khalsa to cater to their taste buds, the people who came in through Bengal, they have, I guess, largely kept it in its original format. So I find that to be an interesting contrast, because even when I travel to Myanmar, even there, the current version of the Ono Khao Suey is not exactly in the original version that it used to be. Like, I went to a couple of cafes where they were like, oh, I'm guessing you're referring to coconut noodles, coconut milk noodles, sorry. Some of the locals did not even know what Khao Suey was, which was very, very surprising to me. It was almost like there was like a mass amnesia of their food heritage to a large extent. So, I mean, I found that to be very, very contrary to what I had expected when I had gone there. So, like it's just a very, whatever, like a very contrary to my expected thing when I was traveling to Myanmar.
Yeah, so, I mean, I can totally agree.
Just to add one point here, Mandira, just to draw a parallel, like on the contrary, like there's this other dish called mohingar, which is the fish soup. So that was also, like as popular as Khao Suey in the earlier days, before people, came from Myanmar to India, Pakistan, etc. Because I've heard of people in my family as well who, when they were in their college days, and they are like much older, like in their 70s, 80s right now, they used to have both mohingar as well as Khao Suey as school children and college children. So it was something which was, both were equally popular. So what surprises me is that how come mohingar is still fairly popular in Myanmar, because you still see the local version of it, even as roadside street sellers, they would sell mohingar. Khao Suey is it's more like an Atlantis, of sorts in Myanmar.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Relatively elusive. So I just find it a very, very interesting parallel, because there are food cultures that have survived in its original form, but this one thing which was so popular has suddenly like just evaporated from.
Yeah, it is very interesting, right? I mean, I wonder what do you think? I mean, I was wondering whether it could be the difference at least between the two communities. Okay, I don't know. I mean, this, of course, I'm thinking out aloud. I haven't come across anything. If you look at it in terms of, like if there is a certain adaptability of a certain dish, which is sort of Indianized. So the Indians and the Burmese really was, you know, they existed differently. So, like for example, when you were talking about the Memons, why did that version be different from the
Right.
Calcutta version, right? I think in some ways it would have, they would have adapted to it earlier, in the sense that it traveled as it was being eaten in wherever they were in Burma,
Right.
that it sort of remained faithful to the Memnese version of it of the pre-Exodus version of it to what it was, right? In the sense there was always a variation between the Bengali version stroke the Indian version of this versus the Memnese stroke, I mean the Kolkata version of it and the Surat version of it, right? So I think it was an adaptable, they took what was Burmese and sort of Indianized it in a version that was palatable to themselves. I mean, I mean, that's what I think. I'm not 100% sure. Because even the samosa, for example, there is a samosa version of it that exists in Burma.
Right.
The samosa.
Right. Yeah, I think they call it sambusa or something. So I found that also very interesting. And there's also the Burmese parota, which is like the
right.
Indian paratha.
Yeah.
So there's so many
Which
of
is
these.
traveled also to Malaysia.
Yeah, and they are very excited about these dishes. Like I went to this small hill station called Kalau, and in a lot of these local food stores, they had like sambusa and the the Burmese paratha as the main thing that was being served along with tea. So it's amazing how they are so excited about some of the remnants of Indian food cuisine that's still popular there. And in India, in certain parts of India, people are still so excited about remnants of the Burmese cuisine that they were able to bring back with them. So it's such a fascinating tapestry of cuisine that connects across different cultures.
And in for example, if you actually go to Ziyawadi and in the Indian quarters of Myanmar, they even now they don't have very much interaction. I asked them if they had Khow. I'm not 100% sure they did. I mean, they also realized it was just noodles. So I mean, I don't know, but these people were descendants of people who went from UP. So they spoke mostly Bhojpuri. So yeah.
Because I've also heard that in the south of India, there are a few places again where there are communities of Indians who had migrated from Myanmar. So there are certain pockets where apparently khao sui is served or it's popular amongst these little micro communities. So I do hope sometime to dig up more details about this.
Yeah, that will be interesting. I mean, maybe there is a version of the South Indian version of khao sui, which is unknown.
I want to see if there's any variation or if it's still in the original form.
Yeah, maybe it's
this, But Mandira, I think this conversation that we're having right now, on the face of it, it may seem to be about food and like the nuances of Burmese cuisine and also some of the Indian cuisine, which is still popular in Myanmar. But I feel that this conversation is very important in the current time that Myanmar is going through, with all the political changes that are happening there.
I'm sorry, I lost you for a second. You said the conversation, you said this is, it might seem about its nuances, and then I missed you.
Right. So what I was saying is that on the face of it, like our conversation is largely about Burmese cuisine and about khao sui in particular. But I think the underlying question here is, or rather the underlying point here is keeping in mind the current crisis that Myanmar is also going through, where people don't know they're going to get like their version of true democracy ever back. And they've had this little window of calm in between where like when I also went to Myanmar, I was surprised to see like there were many more malls that have come up as compared to what I thought there would be. Like modernization was just beginning to happen. And I was also hoping that modernization would not become the monster that it's become in many other countries. So just when they were beginning to modernize themselves, again, there is this, situation where obviously people's like fundamental rights are taken away to a large extent. So I just feel that in the current context in particular, talking more about like the bygone Burmese culture and which people there themselves have forgotten to a large extent, because many of them have not had a chance to even travel outside their own country. And if you're saying that, even till 2013, cell phones were not that prevalent, so that's also like a fairly recent thing that has
Yeah.
come into Myanmar. So it was largely like a closed country. And for
Hmm.
whatever reason, it seems that the locals themselves have had like, not they haven't had an opportunity to kind of preserve and keep some aspects of their food culture. Like, for instance, here, in the way that people who went away from Myanmar could, because perhaps they had the resources, perhaps they had the time, perhaps they even had the peace of mind to be able to, keep up that kind of tradition. So, what do you think in terms of like going forward? Like, how do you think this whole situation is going to play out? Like, how can Myanmar really uh, become
So you're
like
talking
what?
about the coup.
Yes.
Yeah. So like you said, when I went, I mean, I think between, and I think I went in, like I said, in 2013 when it had sort of just opened up, and then I went 2 years later, and I could see the stark difference between 2013 and 2015. There was much more modernization. Um, there were far there the it became like the in thing. If you know, I mean, if you remember about 2015, it was a thing to go to. Okay, there were five-star hotels of with great luxury and things like that. It was sort of a hopeful moment of of a closed society, sort of feeling the bit of liberalization or of the world economy. So I think even Pankaj Mishra went to Myanmar at that point of time and wrote about this. I mean, he was of course staying in this one really luxurious hotel and writing about this thing, and it was at that cusp moment. Where do I see the coup? I think that things are completely different. I mean, this happened in 1988. Also, it was very violent, like it is right now. There was international outrage, like it was like now. But what there wasn't was social media. I think social media has kind of transformed this a lot. Now in real time what is happening in Myanmar. So apart from the international outrage and the UN, the Americans, the sort of Western um, sort of outlook of what it is, sanctions and stuff like that, you've also got ordinary resistance sort of coming out and being informed about, or like world being informed about it real time, right? So you've got that. So every time somebody, I mean, women have been at the heart of the resistance, interestingly.
Very interesting.
And yeah, and I think actually there's that to be said about Burmese women. Okay, the Myanmarese women, they've always been at the heart of resistance. It's just that they've never really made headlines. You have Aung San Suu Kyi, uh, and she's wonderful under a challenge. Okay. But you haven't really seen ordinary Burmese women who've been locked up, women who've been denied rights, women who've actually been heroic. Okay. And that's what you're seeing right now with social media. So I do see that it is a different time and a different space. I think that, morally, we will have to have, you will not be able to keep this coup on. I mean, at least I hope so. I'm not saying that it will go back to 100% democracy. Obviously, the army thought that they could do it, right? Which is why they chose to do the coup just before the parliament happened, because otherwise they would have not been able, the acceptability of the results would have, they couldn't have gone back on it. So it was
Yes.
timed very well. That I must say. But as other people's as post that, they seem to have lost the plot. They have not realized the moral the moral shaming that social media can do. And I think that is a power to be said of. I think that, whether you look at the Arab Spring, whether you look at this, whether you look at what's happening with the Punjab farmers, you looked at that I think that changes the narrative. So I do believe that there will be a forced version of democracy, whatever way it is. that doesn't mean that Burma is a perfect democracy. I must stress that there is a certain um, there is a certain um, aspect of Burmese democracy as it exists, which leaves out the other. And the seeds of that were sown pre-independent Burma. So, whether it is the way they deal with the Rohingyas, or the way they deal with Indians, who are still considered Indians, by the way. They're not considered Burmese, even though they've lived there from the 19th century. There is that. And whether they will be able to get out of that, I don't know. That is a question that we need to ask. Yeah. So I think that's a big question. I don't know whether social media will be able to make the change happen.
So thank you so much, Mandira. This was such a eye-opening conversation in so many ways, and all the different things that you touched upon, the food, the culture, the politics, about your experiences traveling as a solo woman traveler and as a journalist who was researching on the changes that were happening during this time. I think it's, and also of course like the whole connection with India and Pakistan. So I think this whole tapestry is the larger tapestry is what I guess we all need to start looking at, because I think we're going through times of immense change, and that also times, of course, there are immense like struggles I guess we are all going through, whether it's personally or even at a political level or whatever, but it's also a time of huge transformation. So my only hope is that for once and for all, Myanmar can come out of this entire situation in a really, really positive way, and they can literally get like true democracy back. And I do think it is possible, because a country which has given so much to the world heritage, both in terms of culture, spirituality, as well as food. Yeah. I mean, my hope for the country is to be able to like gather all its resources together, let the women take center stage of this whole revolution in a more profound way, and let everybody kind of get together, get their act together, and get what they truly, truly want for themselves. So I just want to, end on a positive
note of hope. Yes,
and I think people like you who've done such phenomenal work, it will be amazing if you can also. So actually, as a parting thing, a piece of like advice or suggestions, Mandira, how do you think that women or people generally who are interested in helping out Myanmar or people in Myanmar in some sort of way, what are the things that they can do sitting, at their desktops or just sitting at home or in their personal spaces? How can they help in this kind of a situation?
Well, I think one of the things we can do is amplify the voices. That's the only thing. I mean, I'm not sure we can pressurize or do anything else at this moment, because I think that it is, if there is Burmese refugees, and there are some, I think it's important for us to be able to help out in whatever way we can. There was, as far as I know, some sort of crowdfunding for Burmese independent journalists who wanted to report.
Okay.
And it was they wanted sort of for them to be able to keep their data going and stuff like that. So yes, I think that's an incredible important thing to do. But sort of keep engaged with it. I think if there is enough public opinion, I think there will be some sort of, not pressure. I think for India, it's also a very delicate situation. If you read, there is, we're sort of caught in a trap in terms of how we look at it, in terms of we might be protectors of democracy, or we might be, well, certainly champions of it. In the same, but we also have China, so there is a certain aspect of it. I'm not so sure sanctions matter. I don't think we should have sanctions. That's not something I suggest that we do. But I think we need to amplify every independent Burmese voice, so that the world really knows how difficult it is. I mean, and talk about the spirit and heroism of the ordinary Burmese. This thing. So I mean, they're not cowing down at all. Cowering down in terms of in front of tanks. People have stopped shooting. Cops have refused to shoot. it's a fight for it's an ordinary Burmese fight for freedom. I think we should just amplify and let journalists who are braving their lives for this amplify their voices.
Once again, thank you so much, Mandira. And I think these were really, really important suggestions that you've given. And I'm sure that any woman who's listening to this, to you speak today, will certainly take back some very, very valuable insights, whether it is just cultural or whether it's just food related or whether it's, some amount of journalistic or political related narrative. I think, you've covered all these topics really, really well. So thank you so much. And it was really, really wonderful speaking to you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, Mandira.
Bye-bye.